Some people ruin their lives and never fully grasp how or why they did it. My wife, Francesca, is one of those people. Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Matthew, and if you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted, this story might just hit home. I thought Francesca, my wife, was my biggest supporter. I was wrong. This is the story of how I caught my wife cheating on me with my boss. And the moment I saw it for myself, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. You know, I've always believed that hard work pays off. That if you put in the time, the effort, the sacrifice, eventually you'll see the rewards. I worked at Sterling Enterprises, one of the most prestigious firms in the industry. While some of my colleagues left the office at 5 p.m. sharp, I stayed behind, making sure every report was flawless and every strategy airtight. I wasn't just doing the bare minimum, I was investing in my future. And now, it was finally about to pay off because the company would be holding the annual Sterling Enterprises dinner. It was formal, exclusive, and high stakes. Promotions weren't just sent out in emails. They were announced in front of hundreds of executives, clients, and employees. If you got called up that night, it meant your work was recognized, that you were on your way to something bigger. And I was one of the top contenders. I knew my name was in the discussion for a major promotion. This wasn't just about getting a new title. It meant higher pay, more opportunities, and real power in the company. That night was supposed to be a celebration, not just for me, but for us. If there was one thing I was sure of, it was Francesca, my wife, my biggest supporter, my partner. We had been together for years and through everything. She wasn't just my wife. She was the person who made me believe in myself even when I doubted. I never once questioned her loyalty. I never had a reason to. At least that's what I thought. The night of the company's annual dinner had finally arrived. The venue was exactly what you'd expect from a firm like Sterling Enterprises. I felt proud not just because of my career, but because of who was standing beside me, Francesca. Francesca looked incredible. She had always been effortlessly beautiful, but tonight she carried herself with an elegance that turned heads the moment we walked in. I introduced her to my colleagues, and as always, she knew exactly what to say, exactly how to hold a conversation. And people loved her for it. She smiled, laughed, and made small talk, completely at ease in a room full of high-powered executives. Even some of the senior partners, the ones who barely acknowledged most employees, were drawn to her. I stood beside her, watching, basking in the admiration she received. This was my wife, my partner, the woman I had built my life with. And in that moment, I felt proud to have her by my side. But as the night went on, I started noticing things. Francesca, my wife, seemed to be gravitating toward Gerald, my boss, a man with power, influence, and connections. He wasn't just respected in the company. He controlled opportunities. He decided who moved up and who stayed stagnant. At first, it seemed harmless. She was just being friendly, right? I told myself, she's just being polite. She's just making conversation. But my gut was telling me otherwise. At a point, Gerald leaned in, saying something I couldn't hear, and Francesca smiled. I felt like an outsider, like I was watching something unfold that I didn't understand. And for the first time that night, I felt uneasy. Hours later, Francesca leaned in close, placing her hand lightly on my arm. "I need to take this," she said, lifting her phone slightly. I glanced at the screen, no name, just a number. So I just nodded. "Yes, sure. I'll be here." She smiled, squeezed my arm, and walked off, disappearing into the sea of well-dressed executives and servers carrying trays of champagne. At first, I didn't think anything of it. I kept my focus on the conversations around me, nodding along as my colleagues discussed market trends and upcoming projects. But then, 20 minutes passed. Francesca was still gone. I casually glanced around the room, expecting to see her somewhere, maybe near the bar or chatting with another guest. Nothing. Another 5 minutes. I checked my phone. No messages from her. Maybe she stepped outside where it was quieter. Maybe the call was just taking longer than expected. I turned back to my conversation, trying to push away the slight unease creeping up my spine. But then another 5 minutes. Now it had been 30 minutes since she left. And suddenly I wasn't so sure anymore. I felt someone nudge my arm, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was Eric, one of my colleagues. We weren't exactly close, but we had worked together enough times to have a decent rapport. He leaned in slightly, swirling the whiskey in his glass, and muttered just loud enough for me to hear. "You're a patient man, bro. If my wife was that close to my boss, I'd have questions." I let out a laugh. "What are you talking about?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. Eric took a slow sip of his drink and shrugged. "Come on, man. We all see it. She's been cozying up to Gerald all night." Laughing, touching his arm, giving him those looks. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just smiled and told him my wife was being friendly. By now, the unease sitting in my stomach had turned into full-blown suspicion. I checked my watch. 35 minutes had passed since Francesca had excused herself to take a call. I started scanning the room, looking for her familiar figure in the crowd of executives, servers, and colleagues. But no matter where I looked, she wasn't there. I checked near the bar, thinking maybe she had run into an old friend. Nothing. I glanced toward the balcony, a place where guests often stepped out for air. Empty. That's when it hit me. I hadn't seen Gerald in a while either. A cold realization crept up my spine as my mind started connecting the dots. My heartbeat picked up as I moved through the venue, my pace quickening with each step. The conversations around me faded into background noise. I wasn't even sure where I was headed. My feet just moved, driven by an instinct I desperately wanted to be wrong about. As I turned into one of the quieter hallways, I passed the restrooms, and that's when I heard a low murmur, voices barely audible through the thick doors. I slowed my steps, straining to hear, my mind already racing. Then I heard something else, a muffled moan. I took a step forward, then another, stopping just inches from the restroom door. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I forced myself to call out, "Francesca?" Silence. I swallowed hard, my voice firmer now. "Francesca, are you there?" Still nothing. A rustling sound followed, the kind of noise people make when they've been caught doing something they shouldn't be doing. That silence, that hesitation, it told me everything. My patience snapped. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, ready to call security if I had to. But before I could press the button, the door creaked open. Francesca stepped out first. Her hair was slightly messy, strands falling loose over her flushed face. The dress she had worn so perfectly earlier was now wrinkled, slightly askew, like someone had been pulling at it. Then, stepping out right behind her was Gerald. His tie was loosened. The top button of his shirt was undone. His face wasn't as panicked as Francesca's. It was tight, unreadable, like he was trying to assess how bad the damage was. For a moment, the three of us stood there frozen. None of us spoke. But we didn't need to. The truth was right there, staring me in the face. I felt nothing. No rage. No immediate outburst. I reached for my phone, unlocked it, and hit record. Today is the annual Sterling Enterprises dinner. This is my wife, Francesca, and my boss, Gerald. I just caught them making out in a restroom together. Gerald stiffened. Francesca gasped, stepping toward me, her voice breaking. "Matthew, please." I lifted a hand, cutting her off. I wasn't interested in excuses. I wasn't interested in explanations. I kept the camera on them for a few seconds longer, watching as their perfect little lie crumbled under the weight of the truth. Then, without another word, I stopped the recording and walked away. I didn't say a word to either of them. There was nothing to say. Nothing left to fix. I didn't need an explanation from Francesca or a weak apology from Gerald. I left her behind and drove home alone. I didn't care about the promotion anymore. While driving, my phone buzzed, vibrating in the passenger seat. A text. Then a missed call. Then another. I didn't even look at them. I didn't want to hear her voice. An hour later, the door creaked open. Francesca stepped inside, her face streaked with tears, her makeup smeared. She looked like she had been crying for the entire drive. But honestly, I didn't care. She didn't even say anything at first, just stood there, eyes searching for me, desperate for some kind of reassurance, some kind of excuse to fix things. Matthew, I held up my hand, stopping her before she could say anything more. Don't. That was all I said. I didn't want to hear her explanation. I didn't want to hear how sorry she was. The moment I caught them, everything changed. The rest of the night, there was no yelling, no arguing, just silence. We didn't speak another word. I sat on the couch, staring at the TV with no interest in what was on. She stood by the door for a while, her body language pleading with me to say something. But I couldn't. And I wouldn't. By the time I went to bed, the texts and calls had piled up. Colleagues had somehow heard about what happened. Everyone wanted to know what had gone down and why I left early. I didn't answer. I didn't want to deal with the gossip or the whispers behind my back. I didn't need to hear it from anyone else. I woke up feeling certain that I was done. I knew Francesca was somewhere in the house, probably sitting in silence, waiting for me to speak, hoping there was still something left to salvage. But there wasn't. I got out of bed and took my time making my way to the kitchen. I found Francesca sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. She looked up the second I stepped in, her eyes bloodshot and swollen from a night spent crying. Matthew, please? Her voice cracked as she spoke, desperate, pleading. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, my expression unreadable. I didn't speak right away and didn't offer any sign of sympathy. I wasn't here to comfort her. I was here to end this. Our marriage is already over. My voice was calm, firm, and absolute. There was no anger left, no need for raised voices or accusations. The damage had already been done. Francesca flinched, as if I had physically struck her. No, Matthew, please, it was a mistake. I messed up, I know I did, but we can get through this. I love you. I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. You love me? Was it just Gerald, or are there more? She didn't answer. She didn't even try. And that silence? That was all the confirmation I needed. I exhaled, pushing my chair back as I stood. Your stay in this house expires when the divorce is finalized, I said, my tone unwavering. After that, we're done. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she broke into uncontrollable sobs, her body shaking from the weight of what she had done. I turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the only thing she had left, the consequences of her own betrayal. News travels fast in corporate circles, but a scandal like this? It spreads like wildfire. It started as whispers, colleagues exchanging knowing glances. At first I ignored it. I had no interest in being part of the office gossip mill. By Monday morning, the higher-ups had gotten word of what went down at the company dinner. Gerald being caught sneaking around with an employee's wife wasn't just an embarrassing personal failure. It was a professional disaster. The company prided itself on integrity and leadership, and Gerald's actions didn't just cross the line. They obliterated it. An internal investigation was launched, and as they dug deeper, they found something that didn't surprise me at all. Gerald had a history of affairs within the company. Francesca wasn't the first. Turns out, he had used his position to pursue multiple women in the workplace, manipulating situations to his advantage. Some were consensual, others were blurred lines of coercion masked as mentorship. HR had turned a blind eye before, but now they had evidence, witnesses, and a scandal too big to ignore. By the end of the week, Gerald was placed on leave. A week later, he was fired. Just like that, his career, his entire reputation was destroyed. The powerful, untouchable boss who had once decided the future of others had his own future ripped away. And me? I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I didn't even care. By the time Gerald's downfall was complete, I had already moved on. Francesca, on the other hand, she still didn't get it. Even after the dust settled, even after everything came crashing down, she still looked at me with those same desperate, confused eyes, as if she couldn't understand why it had all fallen apart. Some people ruin their lives and never fully grasp how or why they did it. She was one of them. And honestly, that wasn't my problem anymore. Weeks passed after our separation. My life started to feel normal again. Work was steady, my routine was back, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like myself. And then one night my phone buzzed. A single message. I miss you. Can we talk? I stared at the screen, letting the words sink in. I read it. I deleted it. And I moved on. No response. No closure conversation. She made her choices. And I made mine. So, what would you have done? Would you have given her another chance? Would you have stayed and tried to fix it? Or would you have done what I did? Walked away? No second chances, no explanations. Here's the truth. Some betrayals can't be undone. Some people will only realize what they lost when it's too late. And by then, you won't even care anymore. Thanks for watching. If you've ever been in a situation like this, drop a comment. Let me know what would you have done.